This show is part of the Proclaim Podcast Network, thoughtfully crafted, faithfully told stories that proclaim His name. More at proclaim.fm.
I'm Paul Hastings, and you're listening to Compelled, where we use gripping, immersive storytelling to bring to life Christian testimonies from the kingdom of God, told by the people compelled to live for Him. Recently, we heard from Ali. Ali grew up in Iran and was a practicing Muslim for the first 30 years of his life. But after becoming disillusioned with Islam and moving to America, Ali was exposed to the God of the Bible, who appeared to be radically different than any other God Ali had heard of before. You can hear that entire story by tuning into episode number 104 with Ali. Today, our guest is Brandon Hendriks. When Brandon was just a punk rock kid from the Pacific Northwest, he had an encounter with God that opened up his eyes to his need for a savior. But then 18 years later, he would be confronted with the greatest trial of his life, where Christ showed Himself once again in an entirely new way. So gather around, lean in, and join us for this compelling story from the kingdom of God. Brandon and I sat down at his church office in San Clemente, California, about an hour south of Los Angeles. Brandon was born in 1980, and when he was just a toddler, he developed Guillain-Barré syndrome, a severe autoimmune condition that began progressively paralyzing him. Every day, his parents would wake up to find that another part of Brandon had become paralyzed. Truly a nightmare. But a local church was praying for Brandon and his parents during this time, and just before the growing paralysis killed him, God miraculously reversed the syndrome. His parents were dumbstruck and gave their lives to Christ. If you're one of our monthly partners, then make sure to listen to our behind-the-scenes recording with Brandon, where he tells the entire story. But what you need to know for our story today is that after that event, Brandon's parents became faithful Christians and consistently made sure that Brandon grew up knowing of his need for a personal savior. But although Brandon was surrounded by Christians and he grew up in the church, he just wasn't interested. Instead, when he reached high school, he decided to find his own way.
I was really searching for my identity during that time period. Who am I? I'm not smart enough to be a nerd, not athletic enough to be a jock, not mean enough to be a bully, not like I'm just in this weird middle place of, do I really fit anywhere? And then I discovered punk rock. And that kind of gave me a sense of identity. I was like, oh man, I can be this. There's really no entry requirements other than liking the music, which I did, and having a bit of a disdain for authority, which I did. And so I got really into the punk rock subculture. Ended up getting a mohawk and leather jacket and spikes and chains and all of that, and was in a punk rock band. I was, bassist, lead singer.
And were you still going to church on Sundays with your parents?
Yeah. And I was actually pretty involved, but had, bright red, bright blue hair, covered in safety pins and studs and spikes. And, so it was probably interesting for everyone else in the church to see me on Sunday morning, looking like I didn't belong there, but then also being very involved there. But to me, it was just like, I didn't necessarily see the discongruity of it. It was just who I was. And I was a whole lot of contradictions all wrapped up into one. I got in a tremendous number of fights, just very violent fights found me, but I also went looking as well. And, property damage and general hooliganism and just substances and just general disregard for my own health and bad choices, sinful choices. And I knew they were sinful even at the time, and massive battle going on. And it was a mental battle of, I believe that God is real and that Christianity is real, but I just don't want to submit to that. I want to do my own thing, and Christianity gets in the way. And I don't even know if it's real. I don't know if any of that is anything. So it doesn't matter anyway. I would kind of go back and forth, and I was never set in one place for very long before I would vacillate back the other direction. I would usually go back the other direction and go, you know what? No, I'm not going to. Even if it's real, I'm not going to submit myself to this set of rules or values or ideals because I've got my own. Because there were many, many times when I would become very convinced that Jesus is the way, that Jesus is true, that Christianity is completely accurate. And then I would have to talk myself out of it in order to keep living the lifestyle that I had chosen to live, because you can only exist within cognitive dissonance for so long until you have to get rid of something. And so I would talk myself back out of believing in Jesus so that I could continue living the life that I had chosen to live.
But although Brandon was eager to write off the existence of God so that he could get on with living for himself, God was about to send Brandon a very big wake-up call during his senior year of high school.
My band and I were going to go over to a friend's house to practice because we had some gigs coming up and we needed to lock in our set and all this. And so one of our friends' cars had broken down. And so we couldn't all fit in one car with all our instruments. So one of the band members called his older brother and said, hey, can you come pick us up? His brother pulled up, all of our instruments went in one car, and then the three of us drove away. And at the time, I never wore a seatbelt. I don't know if it was just ignorance of youth or part of that, punk rock rebellion or whatever it was, but I was like, seatbelts, lame. His brother comes flying around a corner so fast that he slid into the other lane as we're going around the corner. And then coming towards us was a semi-truck. So we're all freaking out, screaming, and he can't get it back into our lane. The semi-truck is honking, and right at the last second, the semi-truck swerves into our lane, the lane we should have been in, and goes around the corner in the wrong lane, which, thank God there wasn't somebody behind us that then head-on collided with the semi-truck. But the truck driver, I guess, was taking a calculated risk. Like, I can either slam into this car full of kids right in front of me or go around the corner in the wrong lane and hope there's no one coming around this blind corner. So at that point, we all started saying to his older brother, like, hey, dude, pull over. One of us can drive. I don't know what's going on, but, he's like, no, I'm fine. And so then we all put on our seatbelts. We're still trying to talk him into pulling over, and he refuses to. I found out later he was on a handful of different substances when he came to pick us up. We didn't know that in the moment, but in order to try to convince us that he was okay driving, he started fishtailing the car, just like going back and forth really quickly to show us, I guess, in his mind that he was competent to drive. Well, in so doing, he actually sent the car into a 360 spin, and we started spinning across the road, ended up hitting a curb and flipped the car over, and ended up rolling down an embankment and landed upside down at the bottom. So when it finally hit the bottom of this embankment. The car was upside down. All the windows were shattered. And I remember kicking out the rest of the back window and climbing out of it. And then climbing up this embankment up to street level again. The guy who was driving ended up completely unhurt and just ran, like literally ran until we couldn't see him anymore and didn't show up for a few days after that. And we got up to street level and we're all bleeding and have pieces of glass stuck in us everywhere. And one of my band members, there was a jack that flew up and hit him in the shoulder and broke his shoulder. Other than the cuts and bruises and scrapes and everything, we thought that was the only injury. We get up and he's holding his arm and we're trying to help him get up this embankment. And then we got up to the top and somebody was like, dude, you need to sit down. And you're not in good shape. And I was like, I'm fine. And like, no, just sit down. And I remember bending over to sit down. And when I did, I just had this excruciating pain shoot through my whole body. And that's the last thing I remember. Found out later in the hospital that I had actually broken my back. And I just didn't know it at the time because of all the adrenaline running through me and stuff. So I'm thinking, oh man, I made it out of that okay. And in actuality, one of my vertebrae exploded. Because when the car landed upside down at the bottom, it just compressed my spine until one of my vertebrae just gave out entirely. The doctors told me that was so dangerous. Like, you didn't know, you couldn't have known, obviously, but I had pieces of my vertebrae stuck in my spinal cord. And they're like, man, if you had slipped climbing up that embankment and that piece of vertebrae, severed through your spinal cord, you'd be a paraplegic. But after doing all their tests and everything, they said, okay, well, we've got a couple different options here. We can do surgery right now and try to clean up all those bone fragments and everything. But you run the risk of becoming paralyzed because your spinal cord is just so fragile, which is why it's surrounded by bone, that if we go in and pull out one of those bone fragments, it could essentially short out your spinal cord. And at that point, there's nothing we can do. I was like, well, what's option 2? And they said, option 2 is we put you in a body cast for about 6 months. And then after 6 months, your body will have pushed those fragments to a safe distance. And then we can do surgery and not take the risk that we'd be taking right now, but it pushes out your recovery significantly because now you got 6 months in a body cast before you even have the surgery. Then you have another however long, 6 months again to recover from the surgery. So I opted for the body cast because I did not want to be paralyzed. It was literally a cast that held me in place from my shoulders to my thighs, to where I couldn't twist my back or my hips or my legs or my shoulders or anything at all that would potentially sever my spinal cord. Eventually, they fitted me for what's called a clamshell, which sounds exactly like what it is. It's a cast that's molded to my body that has hinges on one side and straps on the other side. So I could eventually, a few months in, unclam myself and get out of it and walk around for a little bit at a time and then put myself back in my clamshell. But it was not a fun experience. But what it was completely transformative in my life because I couldn't run from God anymore. I couldn't drown out the nagging feeling that God was calling me to himself and wanted something more than what I was offering him. And so during that time, this is pre-cell phone, so it's not like I could just sit there and text and FaceTime people and stuff. Eventually, my friends, like they actually had to come over, which they did at first. And then eventually one of my friends came over and a bunch of other friends were supposed to come over also. And I said, "Hey, where's everyone else?" And he's like, "They're not coming." I was like, "Oh, why?" And he goes, "Well, I'm not actually staying either." I was like, "What do you mean you're not staying?" He's like, "Yeah, here's the thing, man. Like, it's a bummer what happened to you, but it didn't happen to us. Like, we don't have to be here stuck in your house with your family. Like, we want to be out doing stuff. And so we're super bummed, but, we're not going to come over anymore." I mean, that broke me. It was devastating because I considered these guys to be like brothers to me. We're in a band together and we're, hanging out every single day. And just like that is over. It's done because I can't do the things that they wanted to do. But what it did, which I now consider to be such an enormous blessing, is it took that barrier off the table entirely. Like I didn't have that now to keep me from following Christ. And I couldn't go do the things that I was choosing to do before because I literally couldn't move. So I didn't have my lifestyle. I didn't have my friends. I didn't have the stuff that was keeping me occupied and keeping me away from God. It was all stripped away in an instant. And so I started really thinking about my life and where it was headed. And if I let myself stay on the same trajectory that I was on, where that was going to lead. And if I did submit to Christ and follow Christ, where would that lead? And which path was something that I would want to spend my life doing? And I still had a number of questions. I asked my parents to invite the pastor over because I had just a ton of questions about different things historically and archaeologically and metaphysically and all kinds of stuff. Like I just, okay, before I make this choice and really jump in with both feet, I want to get some questions answered and I want to make sure that this thing is legit. And so pastor came over and we had a long, long conversation. And my parents by this point were very, very strong Christians. And so they also had a number of really deep, long conversations with me about Christianity and all of that. I realized also, and this was kind of the final tipping point, my friends had abandoned me entirely. And that was the picture of what the world's version of love looks like. As long as you are aligned with me on everything, we're going the same direction, we're doing the same stuff, we like the same things, we hate the same things, then I love you. But as soon as you diverge from that in any way, I'm done with you. And I saw that. And then I saw my parents and their friends and my sisters and their friends, all of whom were believers and had the love of Christ in them. And they were all coming and hanging out with me and talking with me and watching movies and just being there with me, not abandoning me to emptiness and loneliness. And I saw that juxtaposition and the dichotomy of the world's love and Christ's love so clearly in that moment that that was honestly one of the biggest and most compelling reasons for me to follow Christ is I said, I want to love like that. I want to have the kind of love that doesn't abandon people when they need you most. And if that comes from Jesus, which I now see and fully believe that it does, then that's who I want to be. And that's where I want to follow. So I remember very clearly just pouring my heart out to God and telling him everything and just laying bare, who I thought I was and who I knew that he wanted me to be and that I want to follow him. I want to live for him. I don't want to do it in a half-hearted way. And if he has any purpose for me, anything that he could possibly do with my broken life, that I was entirely his, and he could do with me whatever he chose, and I would follow.
When Brandon's body had been broken, God transformed his heart, showing him that Brandon's life had never been his own. It had always belonged to God. And Brandon could either live in rebellion to his creator or bow in submission. But a new heart wasn't the only thing that God changed. 6 months later, the doctors gave Brandon a new x-ray to see if his spine was ready for surgery. And they came back with shocking news. Not only had his body pulled the shards of bone fragments away from his spinal cord like they were hoping, but his top vertebrae had actually formed a bone spur that reached down, encircled the exposed spinal cord, and then fused with the vertebrae below it. Essentially, Brandon's body had naturally performed the exact surgery the doctors were planning on, something that they were flabbergasted by. But of course, by this point, Brandon knew who was the real source of the miracle. But the story wasn't over yet. Instead, the next chapter would require Brandon to lean in harder than he thought possible. More on that right after this. Welcome back to Compelled. Brandon Hendriks was a punk rock kid who had grown up in the church but wasn't interested in anything related to God. But after nearly dying in a traumatic car wreck that broke his spine and could have easily paralyzed him, Brandon repented of his rebellion and placed his faith in Christ. Over the next few years, Brandon went to college, married his wife Melissa, and eventually entered full-time ministry. 18 years had now gone by since his life-changing wreck in high school. He and his wife now had 3 boys, Xander, Titus, and Uzziah. And in June of 2016, their whole family took a short trip to visit some missionary friends living in Ensenada, Mexico, just a couple hours south of San Diego. And on this particular morning, June 5th, it was a beautiful day, a day that Brandon will never forget, especially as he remembers his oldest son, Xander, an 8-year-old boy full of energy and charm who could quickly make friends with anyone.
He was just exuberant about most everything, actually. Every time the sun would start to set, he would run and try to find me and, "Dad, the sun's setting, let's watch the sunset." And if there was a butterfly, he'd, "Mom, Dad, there's a butterfly, come see this butterfly." And it was just like everything was mind-blowingly amazing to him. And he wanted everyone else to experience it with the same wonder and excitement and joy. And butterflies were significant for him for whatever reason. Anytime he would see a butterfly, everybody around had to stop and look at the butterfly. And we went down to Mexico, and in the morning, someone said, "Hey, do you know that the Baja 500 is happening right now? And it actually starts here in Ensenada." And we're like, "Oh, no, we didn't know that." And they're like, "It actually, like the starting place is just a couple blocks from here. We could walk over there and watch the race start if you want." We said, "Yeah, that might be fun. The boys would enjoy that." And so we went down there, but where we were at was kind of like they start out in this place and you can't really be right where they are when they start, but then they kind of start really fast and then there's this really sharp turn, and we were right where that turn was. And there were concrete barriers there, but these rally trucks are gigantic, and if they hit one of those barriers, it's very likely they would come over the top or whatever. So I felt really uncomfortable being there in that spot, but the boys were liking it, and it was so loud and they'd never seen anything like it. And so I said, "Okay, we can stay, but I want to go to a safer area where we're not right by these giant trucks and stuff." And so we asked one of the officials that was helping with the race, like, where's a safer place? Is there anywhere where there's like bigger barriers or there's more distance? And He was like, yeah, actually, if you go right down here and around the corner, it drops down into this ravine, and you can sit up on the top of the ravine and all the trucks are down underneath you. So it's really safe because they can't get up there. And so I was like, okay, yeah, that sounds great. Let's do that. So we started walking over to that area, and we didn't know this at the time. There was a sharp right turn where the track kind of turned and went parallel to the ravine for a while before eventually dropping down into the ravine further down, which is why we felt like where we were, and we were told by this official, like, that's where you should go down and then go back up. We felt like, okay, that's safe because the track doesn't start until further down. Well, when we were down there and walking on the other side of the ravine, trying to get back up to the top on the other side, one of the drivers missed that sharp right turn to drive parallel to the ravine and ended up launching off of the top and down into the ravine right there. And then instead of stopping and being like, okay, I blew it, I missed my turn, or just like waiting for the dust to settle or whatever, he hit the bottom and then gunned it and came straight at where we were. And he ran over my wife and my son Xander. I was pushing my youngest son in a stroller and pulled the stroller out from the path of the tire, like milliseconds before the tire would have run over him as well. And then the truck, as it went up the other side of the ravine, ended up getting stuck. And it came to a complete stop, and my wife and my son were underneath the truck when it stopped. And the driver had no idea because of all the dust and everything. He didn't even know he had hit anybody. So he was still like gunning it, spinning his wheels, and we're trying to tell him to stop. And finally he stopped, mostly because he was completely stuck. I don't think he even knew at that point that he had hit anybody. So then I dove under the truck and pulled my wife and son out. My wife was unconscious at the time, but gained consciousness shortly thereafter. Her head was split open. Her leg was split from her knee down to her ankle, wide open. You could see all of her, everything inside of her leg, and the bottom of her foot was just shredded. She had to have multiple surgeries to put it all back together and staple her head back together and stuff. And my son was unconscious as well. I pulled him out and started calling for an ambulance to come, and eventually did. And there was some medical personnel that rushed over and started attending to both my wife and my son pretty quickly. And then the ambulance came and took both my son and my wife away. My wife was rushed into surgery, and my son was taken to the emergency room, and they tried to revive him many times and never could get a pulse or anything. And he was pronounced dead in the hospital, but later found out that he had died instantly at the scene. His spinal cord had been completely disconnected. And so when my wife got out of surgery, I had to tell her that Xander had died, and it was awful. She had not only the trauma of the accident and head contusion and having her leg reconstructed, but losing her son. I had losing my son and watching my wife go through that. And I don't know that there's a harder thing that someone can go through than watching their child get killed right in front of them. there was a moment the next morning. I hadn't really slept that night at all, but I was in bed. I just spent the whole night just weeping and mourning, and then right as dawn started breaking through, I could see through the blinds that it was starting to become light outside, just barely. I felt God speak to me, and this does not happen often for me. It's not a like, oh yeah, every morning God tells me what he wants me to do that day sort of thing. It's very, very rare that I actually feel direct communication or direction from God, other than just the guiding and leading of the Holy Spirit and conviction of sin and stuff like that. But he said, you need to worship me right now. Before the sun rises all the way, you need to worship me. And I was like, no way. Not after what you did to me. And I realize now what I didn't realize then, which is that I thought I had entered into a contract with God that he had never entered into. It was a fake contract that I made up in my own mind, that if I did the things that God was calling me to do, that he would protect me and my family, provide for me, make sure nothing bad ever happened. I just kind of had this mindset that as long as I was being faithful to God and what God had called me to, that he would take care of the rest. He would not let anything bad befall us. And so what I didn't realize in that moment is that I was already growing a seed of bitterness in my heart towards God, because I felt like he broke the contract. Like he did not live up to his part of the agreement. And there was this already growing seed of bitterness and resentment and anger towards God that I think if it had been allowed to continue growing, would have taken me out of ministry, out of relationship with God entirely, because I wouldn't have been able to continue, because I would have felt like God was untrustworthy. We had this agreement, you broke the agreement, so how and why would I ever point people towards you after that? He was calling me in that moment to worship him, because he knew, and I know now, that worship, true worship, cannot exist in the same time, in the same place, in the same heart as bitterness and resentment towards God. One of those two things can be, but not both. And it's not to say that bitterness or resentment can't creep in once again. And I had to continue plucking that out repeatedly over the course of the next year or so. But in that moment, that seed was already becoming very, very large. Pulling weeds is definitely the worst part of gardening by far. All the rest of it's fun, but pulling weeds is awful. But if you don't do it and you let those weeds grow, first of all, they kill your garden and nothing else can grow. And secondly, they get harder and harder and harder to pull over time. The more you let them go, the more you neglect them, the more you ignore them, they're not going to go away. They're just going to keep growing. And as they grow, that root gets bigger and thicker and wraps around other roots from other things. And eventually, you start pulling that up and it's leaving root fragments behind that can continue growing. It's pulling up other plants, etc. And so in that moment, I think there was such a gigantic weed growing in my garden, even though it had only been growing for not even a full 24 hours at that point, that it had to be pulled out or it would kill everything. And after a little while of arguing, fighting with God, telling him, no, I'm not going to do it, I eventually, through gritted teeth and tears just streaming down my face. I was laying on my back at the time. I just remember my ears filling with tears, and my pillow is just soaking wet. All my hair and the back of my head is matted down because my pillow is just soaking. I did not want to worship God in that moment, and it was so hard to get to the point where I was willing to. And then eventually, right before the light outside got really bright, it was still like pre-dawn, kind of like it was peeking over, but it wasn't actually, the sun wasn't actually up yet. Right before that happened, I finally relented, surrendered, and started singing a worship song again, like through gritted teeth and tears and snot, and just probably nobody hearing it would have even recognized that it was a song or that I was singing, but I knew, and God knew, and it was Good, Good Father, which to this day breaks me when I hear it. It was a significant moment that I truly believe changed the course of my life from that point forward, that I was at a crossroads that couldn't be pushed out. Like I couldn't just sit in that crossroads and wait until later to choose a path. I had to choose it right in that moment. And I don't know where I would be today if I had chosen the other path. I'm quite sure I wouldn't be sitting here. I'm quite sure I wouldn't be in the position I'm in. I don't know. I know that God was doing that and forcing me to make that choice right at that moment, because the alternative would have been far worse. As hard as that was to make that choice, the path that I would have gone down would have been really horrible for my kids, my wife, myself. I shudder to think what that would have been. But sometimes you just have those crossroads that God gives you, and as much as you might want to say, give me a few days to think about it, or, I'm not ready to make that choice right now. That was one of those moments where it was now or nothing. It was, you choose this right now in this moment, or you're choosing to walk down a path that, is going to take you somewhere you really don't want to be.
As Brandon lay there sobbing, grieving, mourning the loss of his dear son, he echoed back the truth expressed by King David in the 23rd Psalm. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no evil, for you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. Brandon knew that he had to cling to this truth desperately, even as the dark clouds loomed overhead. But he would not have to walk this journey alone, because soon an ally would join him. Coming up right after this. Welcome back to Compelled. Brandon Hendriks had watched in horror as his wife Melissa and their 8-year-old son Xander were run over by a truck during the Baja 500. Melissa was seriously injured, but their son Xander was instantly killed. That night, Brandon cried out to God, sobbing in grief. But Brandon also realized that God was still sovereign, still in control, and still worthy of his worship. A few days later, Brandon met the driver of the vehicle, embraced him, and forgave him. Then, shortly after that, the Hendriks held Xander's memorial service in celebration of life.
Today, we plan to have a celebration of life for Xander Solomon Hendriks. But we also know that today will be very difficult. Would you please pray with me as we commit our time to the Lord?
And so after the memorial service, we all went outside, and all the children were given a little box with a couple butterflies in it. And all at the same time, we opened the boxes, and all the butterflies just kind of flew away. And seeing all the kids that were there at that service, which there was a lot because he was only 8.5 years old. So it's all of his peers and classmates and our friends and our friends' kids, and seeing them just, whoa, oh, wow, look at and they're landing on people's arms and heads. And it was just another one of those moments of just like, oh man, Xander would have loved this. We felt the presence of God and the power of God in our lives during that season like we never had in our lives before that. Some of that came through the church that just really rallied around us and blessed us in incredible ways. Our small group, our individual friends from the church, but also just people we didn't even know, people that were part of the church that just, there was a small group that came together and were praying about what they could do for us. And then they told us that they, as a small group, had decided that they were going to pay for a weekly cleaning service for us for a year, 52 weeks of cleaning. And that is not cheap by any means, but that's what they decided to do as a small group. So they pooled their money together and paid this cleaning service that came for an entire year every week and cleaned our house for us. And I would have never thought to do that for someone. It wouldn't have even ever crossed my mind. But even that just practical thing, that was such an amazing, incredible blessing, because when you are completely emotionally drained to nothing, and it's everything you can do to show your kids love or to get out of bed in the morning or to love your wife or do your job or whatever, you just have nothing left. I mean, you don't even feel like you have what you need to do those things. And so for someone to take something off your plate that you may not think it takes a lot of emotional energy to clean your house, but it takes something, it takes motivation, it takes energy. Like there's something that has to go into that act. And those are the sorts of things that just often get neglected and missed. And to be able to be taken care of in that way, it reminded me very much of when I had a broken back in high school, and the love of the church, the love of my sister's friends and my parents' friends, and the Christians who rallied around me and showed love during that time in the way that I needed it, in the way that I could accept it. That was a major reason I became a Christian. And then once again, I was experiencing the love of the body of Christ poured out in really significant ways and really practical ways. When you're in that season of life where just completely empty, you can't really express thankfulness. Even that, like you can say thanks, but you've got nothing left to give to anyone. And so everyone that gives anything to you has to understand and realize they're not going to get anything in return. They're not even going to get a note that says thanks so much or a text or anything. There were people that texted me during that time consistently, like very sweet, thoughtful texts, and I'm praying for you and whatever. And I would see the text and I would appreciate it, but I didn't even have the emotional bandwidth to reply back to it. And so if you are loving someone out of a worldly, reciprocal sort of love, you're going to get incredibly frustrated with those people. And like, I brought them dinner and they never even sent me a thank you note, or I texted them and they never texted me back, whatever. But when you love from the never ending well of love that God gives us, that He pours out on us, that if we live in that, it overflows onto those around us, then you don't expect that back. You don't expect anything back. And you can keep loving people even when they don't have the ability to love you in return. And when you're completely empty, you can't love in return. You got nothing left to give or offer. And so seeing the church love in that way was so incredible, but also it was convicting. Like, man, we need to love people like that all the time, not just when they're going through the hardest and worst moment of their life. Losing a child is the number one determining factor of divorce. It's the highest event that can happen to a couple to guarantee that that's where they're headed. And because we knew that already, and because neither of us wanted that for ourselves or our kids, we got into therapy right away. We put in the work. We've continued to put in the work together, even though we wrapped up that initial couple years of therapy. We continue to go back periodically, even since then, and just do little checkups and make sure we're on the right track, because it's a lifelong journey.
A decade has passed since Xander's death, and by the grace of God and the encouragement of his people, the Hendriks learned how to breathe again. But it doesn't mean that Xander's absence is no longer felt.
Still miss my son every single day and wish that he were here. It's a bummer that he's not here. It's a bummer that he never met his baby sister. I have a daughter now that was born a couple years after he died. I thought it would be really, really hard to have a child that had never met him. And I didn't know how that was even possible. I was freaking out even as Melissa was going into labor, just going, how is this going to work? Am I going to be able to love another child after my heart was crushed into a million pieces with Xander dying? But that little girl has been such a tremendous blessing in our lives. She asks about her brother all the time, constantly. Did Xander do this? Did Xander like this? I bet Xander would love this drawing I just made, and it's so precious. God gave me more than I could have possibly asked for in her and in the ability to love her. Like I now it seems silly to have even questioned or thought or been concerned that I wouldn't be able to love her because I'd lost a child, because God just opens up new areas of your heart that weren't even there before. God is not limited by our perceptions of limitation and, I only have this much love to give, and now this as much is gone because Xander's gone. Like, he just created new avenues, new ability to love, and I'm just love that precious little angel so much. And she's been incredibly healing for my wife as well, having a daughter, her first daughter, only daughter, but she's been an incredible blessing to our family. And we are to a point as a couple where we are able, when the opportunity arises, to help other couples who are going through that. It's not an enjoyable experience at all, but we know how meaningful and necessary it was to have people walk through that with us who actually understood what that was like. And so we are available to others when they are going through those things as well. It's a bummer when you become an expert in an area that you never wanted to be an expert in. I'm kind of the go-to person amongst the people that I know when something like this happens to someone they know. And so it's the blessing and a curse of knowing that you can be a blessing to them, and at the same time knowing how horrific that is going to be once again, to walk through that with someone and that sort of thing.
As our conversation came to an end, I was curious, how has Brandon's experience with tragedy shaped his perspective?
I've always said, but now I actually know, because I've lived it, that God doesn't waste pain. I don't believe that God is the source of pain. I think that came with the fall and with, the brokenness of the world. But I do believe that God is in the business of redeeming everything, and that includes the pain of our lives. And if we allow him to use the pain that we experience, that all of us will experience to one degree or another, for his glory, he will. And if we allow him to use our pain that we've experienced to expand his kingdom, he will. And if we allow him to use our pain to point us and grow us deeper in our relationship with him, he will. And so I can't bring my son back as much as I would love to, but I can engage with God to not allow that pain to be wasted, and to, as much as is possible for me, share my son's story and my family's story as a story of God's faithfulness, of God's trustworthiness, and of God and even the church meeting you in your hardest, deepest places for the glory of God, for the expansion of the kingdom. And that's what I want to be about. It's who I am and who he's called me to be. So to have the opportunity to share what God has done in my life and through my family, even not in spite of, but even through the hardest and worst moments of my life, is a tremendous opportunity for me to be useful to the kingdom. So thank you for the opportunity.
Amen. Appreciate you just being very candid. Again, really appreciate that, man.
Thank you.
There are some interesting parallels between those two formative moments in Brandon's life. After Brandon's wreck in high school, his body had been literally broken, and he laid there, powerless, unable to physically carry on. But through the pain of his inability and abandonment by his friends, his heart had been softened, and God transformed it. Likewise, after watching Xander die in that terrible accident in Mexico, Brandon's heart had been broken. And that night, he laid there in his bed, sobbing, powerless, unable to emotionally carry on. But as his heart softened and he realized that he needed to immediately prune out the weed of bitterness, God met him and began the long process of redeeming that tragedy. I don't know what kind of trial you may be facing today, and you don't have any clue about the ordeals you may face in the future. But what we can know is what God promises us in the Bible. And it may feel uncomfortable, but it's the truth. Jesus tells the disciples in John 16:33 that they will face tribulation. But he then says, "Take heart, I have overcome the world." And Brandon will be the first to remind you that as you walk through your valley of the shadow of death, you will never walk alone, because the Good Shepherd will be by your side. Also, in both trials that Brandon experienced, he was met with tangible expressions of God's love through his local church. And let me encourage you that you don't have to walk through this life on earth without a local church. They were placed here on earth by the Lord for our good. So don't isolate yourself. And if you need help finding a local church, then let me point out the Church Finder tool available on our website. Just visit compelledpodcast.com and click the link at the very top that says Find a Church. Today, Brandon and Melissa are raising their kids in Southern California. Brandon serves as the president and CEO of Every Generation Ministries, which partners with local churches in 18 countries to reach children in their local communities, including refugee camps, slums, and ghettos. You can learn more at egmworld.org. And if you know someone who would be blessed by Brandon's story, please send this to them. It's episode number 105 with Brandon Hendriks. It's our delight to release these stories for free, but that's only possible because of our sponsors and the generous financial support of our listeners like you. Would you consider joining Compelled as a monthly partner? As of right now, we have 207 monthly partners, and we'd love to see that number grow to 300. A single episode of Compelled can take upwards of 80 hours to produce, and it's not cheap. If you want to continue helping us create more stories with excellence, just like Brandon's, then please consider joining Compelled as a monthly partner. You'll get access to all of our behind-the-scenes interviews with over 100 hours of additional interview content that we never had time to publish, including almost 2 more hours of stories with Brandon, like the story about his paralysis as a toddler and the miraculous way that God healed him, or the stories of when he was in college as a Christian but still looked like a punk rock kid and was actually asked by multiple churches to stop attending because of his hairstyle and clothes. You can hear all of those stories and more in our behind-the-scenes content when you become a monthly partner. And you'll also get access to all of our new episodes 1 week early without ads. There's no set price, it's totally up to you. Just choose the monthly amount that makes sense for you. And by doing that, you're helping us create new episodes of Compelled. To join as a monthly partner or to make a one-time donation, just visit compelledpodcast.com/donate. Today's episode was edited by Will Jackson, mixed and mastering by Sonomorphic, and our associate producer is my gregarious wife, Sarah Hastings. Shout out to Compelled listener Christy Annity for connecting us to Brandon. Christy, thanks for sending that cold email 3 years ago. We were so happy to share Brandon's story with the world. I'm your host, Paul Hastings, and you've been listening to Compelled. We'll be back next time with another compelling story. We'll see you then.